Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. For the next 60 days, starting either earlier this week or as of this Friday, emissaries of Washington and Tehran will do battle not by bombers or drones, but rather by claims and arguments. They will hash out the various clauses of the Memorandum of Understanding electronically signed by both President Donald Trump and the Speaker of Iran's Parliament, or Majlis, namely Kalibaf, with a common goal of reaching a more permanent agreement than a mere cessation of hostilities with initial concessions. Will they get there safely, or is it more reasonable to assume a breakdown in negotiations and a resumption of hostilities? Joining us to analyze this matter include, all the way from the United States, Professor Russel Berman, formerly served as a senior advisor at the U.S. State Department's policy planning staff, currently the director of the Middle East and Islamic World Working Group at Hoover Institution at Stanford University. It's a pleasure having you with us, Russel.
Good to be back, Jonathan.
It's a pleasure indeed. Also joining us from elsewhere in here in Israel is Brigadier General in Reserve Relik Shafir, formerly an Israel Air Force commander, as well as a fighter pilot, among others. It's a pleasure having you with us, General.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, the Memorandum of Understanding is currently still being discussed. Not everything is hammered out, despite having signed on the draft, and therefore we are also not seeing the publication as of this moment in time. But let's start by dissecting what is publicly known, i.e. acknowledged by both the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran.
One hopes that it does not turn out to be a memorandum of misunderstanding, because usually both sides, especially when the Iranians are involved, have different interpretations even for the same word or phrase. But the initial actions emanating from the MOU have to do with the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, some gestures regarding the unfreezing of certain Iranian assets, which should be dedicated only to quote-unquote humanitarian purposes, and the rest, especially the core, which is the nuclear project, which the United States has vowed to deny Iran, and the Iranians want only to repeat what they said many years ago when they signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and then in 2015, in the preamble to the JCPOA, they will try to wiggle their way out of any new commitments.
A signature that was placed on the Non-Proliferation Treaty by not the current regime, not the Ayatollah regime, that is, but rather by the king at the time, the Shah. But let's turn now to Professor Berman. I'd like to ask you, since one of the points that I mentioned in the latter part of my opening is that we are asking ourselves whether or not the Memorandum of Understanding could be successful initially, and whether or not the latter deal, the final status agreement, so to speak, would also be viable, considering the fact that while Vice President J.D. Vance and the presidential envoys, both Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, have come out and effectively encouraged the president to adopt this understanding, the U.S. intelligence community was actually warning that the Iranians are not serious about it and are actually coming to deceive the United States and to exploit it to their advantage, all the while CIA Director John Ratcliffe encouraged the president not to go after this Memorandum of Understanding. And we also understand that both U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio, as well as Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, have also voiced their objections. Of course, President Trump has made his decision as the commander-in-chief to adopt it nonetheless, but with all of the responsible actors in the current administration, as at least two of those are regarded as such, coming out and stating, look, the Iranians are deceiving us, and what we're seeing in our intelligence assessments is that their only interest is to survive for a little bit longer. Are we in a position to be optimistic about this MOU and subsequent deal even bearing some sort of consequence?
Well, Jonathan, the only thing that is clear is that a lot is not clear. I don't know about optimism or pessimism, but let's determine that there are lots of breathless reports in the press based on no evidence and a lot of gossip. We don't know if the text of the MOU is indeed truly finalized. We don't know if it will be signed. And apparently, if it is signed, there will be a 60-day period in which negotiation takes place, and we have no idea what the outcome of those negotiations will be. So there are a lot of unknowns here, making speculation really, really dubious. One believes that the MOU at the minimum would initiate this 60-day period, that Hormuz would be opened somehow without tolls, although there's some ambiguity there as well, because one could invent other sorts of fees besides tolls, and that the ceasefire would continue. That's all we know. The real test of the whole process will be whether, in particular on the nuclear file, Trump ends up achieving something that is better than JCPOA. A gold standard would be not some commitment by Iran that it won't pursue a nuclear weapon. It's been saying that all along. The issue would be no enrichment, extraction of the enriched uranium, no centrifuges, and a robust inspection system. That's the metric. That's the real metric. And then, of course, there are the other issues, the ballistic missiles and the support for the regional destabilizing forces, Hezbollah, and the messy linkage of the Lebanon front. But the key issue on which we will determine whether Trump has succeeded or failed is the nuclear file.
Indeed. And again, according to U.S. intelligence, per a variety of reports, the belief is that Iran will not accommodate American requests when we're talking about the nuclear infrastructure, enrichment, and other demands related to this crucial issue. And as President Trump has stated over and over again, this is the most important topic. Everything is on the sidelines when we're talking about Iran not gaining the capacity to attain nuclear weapon capabilities, procure, or whatever. This ultimately is something that will determine the success of this diplomatic engagement. Now, with that being said, it is also quite clear, General Shafir, that the Islamic Republic of Iran is currently, essentially, we could say, in the driver's seat when we're talking about trying to manipulate the United States to turn against Israel and to ultimately decouple Israel and the United States from one another by emphasizing, and I quote from a press conference conducted by the foreign minister of the Islamic Republic, Abbas Araghchi, earlier today, where he said, the end of the war also includes the end of occupation. Without the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the territories they have occupied in the war, a full end to the war has not been achieved, and any military attack by the Zionist regime on Lebanon from now on, as well as the continued occupation of Lebanese territories, will, in our view, be considered a violation of the Memorandum of Understanding. It seems like it's the Iranians instructing Hezbollah to strike Israel on the one hand, then Israel responds, and then they go and say, okay, but here's another violation of Israel. So what is exactly happening here?
Well, I think it is quite clear, as even Trump himself said, that Iran has never won a war and has never lost a negotiation. And the coupling, as far as the Iranians are concerned, have to do with the fact that the Hezbollah are made up of Shia sect in Lebanon, about 40% of the population in Lebanon. And that kind of allows them the coupling of Hezbollah into the game. Same goes for the Houthis, who are different types of Shia in the south. So they are looking at themselves as the victims ever since 2nd of October 680, which was the Battle of Karbala, where Hussein was assassinated. That they are always with victims, and this is a pact of people who are on the defense, and that allows them the latitude, and this is part of their power. Now, what will go on, or how will things come out following the 60 days and perhaps 60 more days that we're facing, it remains to be seen. But the Iranians have this bizarre type of negotiation where they enlarge their claims to the maximum and then come down, which is very different from the way Trump thinks. So it is really unstable. I'll also mention that the last time that we had points of discussion in this area of the world were the Ten Commandments about 3,000 years ago, and they're still debated. So let alone the 14 points that may come out this Friday.
Indeed. Well, Mr. Oren, history tends to repeat itself, and yet we are in a situation where it seems like the Iranians are not necessarily interested in the current MOU. They believe that there is true leverage in this period of time ahead of the signing, and as such, they're going to use it to their advantage, since the sequence of warfare is essentially putting the United States and Iran on the path towards renewed fighting. But to what end? What is the calculus here from the Iranian perspective?
Right. Let me just add to what General Shafir said regarding the Ten Commandments, for the sake of younger members of our audience, that the tablets involved were not iPads. But in any event, President Trump, by character and experience, is unabashedly transactional. And for him, the MOU is an IOU or a double IOU. I'm going to give the Iranians an incentive. They are supposed to reciprocate. And if we are speaking the same language through interpreters, maybe we can meet halfway. For the Iranians, the better result would be an open-ended ceasefire without elevating it to another level of peace, as Trump calls it.
Under the terms of the MOU.
Yes, but we remember here in our region, President Nasser, Prime Minister Golda Meir, through American mediation, reached a ceasefire in August of 1970, and it was intended to last 3 months. In the interim, Nasser died, Sadat was elected president, and the 3 months became 3 years. And it ended by the Yom Kippur War. But during the 3 years, it was always extended. So none of the parties would have an interest in calling it a failure 2 months from now.
Well, Professor Berman, you know, we all want to see a end to this war at some point with a favorable outcome to the United States, and by extension to Israel and to our European allies and partners, including to allies and partners here in the region and in the East. The markets have reacted to the announcement of Trump quite favorably, with plenty of people making handsome amounts during this time, and also taking into account that just prior to entering into the studio, I checked, and West Crude stood at roughly $77, which is a very great improvement from the last couple of weeks. But in the event that this collapses, this whole situation is going to roll back. It's not going to play into the advantage of President Trump and his administration in this context. So again, what is the calculus here to try and really push through to a certain finish line when we know that this is not necessarily going to yield favorable outcomes?
We know that it will not necessarily yield favorable outcomes, but maybe one can get there. One has to bear in mind that it's ever more clear that there is dissension on the Iranian side. There are different parties competing there. And there's debate in the West. That's the nature of our political system. So we'll have to see what is in the memorandum of understanding, not because that is going to be binding law. Let's remember that the United States and Iran signed the JCPOA. Iran did not live up to the JCP, and the United States pulled out of it. So a memorandum of understanding is ultimately just a statement along a longer path. President Trump has reiterated that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's clear that parties in Iran don't want to concede that point. Maybe they will lie, maybe they will dissemble, but nonetheless, there's a fundamental disagreement there, and the goal will be to try to resolve that. Of course, it could just get kicked down the road again and again, but I think President Trump wants some kind of victory where his critics will not be able to say that he's giving us only Obama 2.0.
Well, this is undoubtedly not an Obama 2.0, and I'd like to ask you, Professor Berman, since I had at least 24 discussions over the past 2 days just over this topic, including with our joint friends in Washington. And many of them refer to this as a joint plan of action of 2008 from the Bush era, which was founded upon a political arrangement rather than reality on the ground, and ultimately brought about the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2015. But this current state of play is merely a prelude to hopes of a favorable outcome. And this doesn't seem like a good position to start with, trying to spin it as a great deal, since this is not a peace agreement, as President Macron announced, in the G7 meeting with President Trump. It is a premature understanding or statement, as you mentioned, to start negotiating for 60 days on something that, again, U.S. intelligence states quite clearly is not going to happen.
Okay, listen, it's clearly not the end of the story. We don't even know what the memorandum of understanding will say and if it will be signed on Friday. But let's assume that it is. The criticism from the intelligence agency one has to take with a big grain of salt. They've been wrong again and again and deeply politicized again and again. Remember that the U.S. intelligence agency said that Iran is not a nuclear danger not that long ago. So that's just one more voice in Washington. Nothing is absolute. No memorandum of understanding. What is absolute will be when the enriched uranium is extracted and there is no possibility of enrichment. That will be absolute. Before that, we're all just speculating. We're all just giving sound bites for the news. I understand that there's a lot of thinking about what the next step will be, and that's right. That's the right thing to do. One should strategize, but to declare this a grand deal or to to clear this an absolute failure or surrender is just hot air.
I appreciate that very much. General Shafir, I'd like to turn to you and ask you specifically on the Israeli calculus here. What should Israel do, considering that on the one hand, it views itself as a secondary actor to President Trump, and it wants to stand by the administration in the negotiation to achieve a good deal, which also the president wants to achieve, and we can have no doubts that that is his aspiration, and that's what he hopes to work towards. But at the same time, it also needs to ensure its own national security interests, including in Lebanon, including vis-a-vis Iran, and were it not the case to see a favorable outcome to an understanding, and considering the fact that Israel has not received the memorandum of understanding from the United States to review, according to a variety of reports, what are we to make out of it?
I think Israel made a huge mistake quite a while ago in putting all the chips on Trump and disregarding both different voices in the United States and certainly in Europe, which were the basis of support for Israel from the start of the war in Gaza 3 years ago. And that led to the fact that when Trump had changed his mind about where he wants to get to, and the fact that the big failure of this particular war with Iran was the failure to recognize that the Hormuz Straits were the insurance policy for Iran, and the fact that they are able to threaten the not just whoever's at the Hormuz Straits, but also the Gulf states, and put them in so much pressure that they, distrusting that the United States wants to play to the end, this accord to the end, are actually in dire straits, not just in the Hormuz Straits. So this whole thing collapsed into putting the nuclear deal as, I would say, the only deal on the table, and all the rest are left for the locals. And so Israel is left with the fact that it put all the chips, as I said, but also wanted to swallow too much, that the United States, as an ally to Israel, will help it with Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran, and also refrain from any pressure on Israel about the Judea and Samaria problem with the Palestinians. That was too much I think, for President Trump, and people have been putting a lot of pressure on Trump to refrain from looking as if he's working for Mr. Netanyahu, and Mr. Netanyahu could not pull back on his hopes of being able to manipulate, so to speak, Trump. And he's also got elections up ahead. He's promised too much and been able to deliver too little, and he's got this elections coming up. So I think on the whole, we may get a good nuclear deal. And I think the main difference from the JCPOA is the fact that war came before the deal and not after the deal, which means that it can come back again. I think Mr. Obama, as a president, came out a little bit as a paper tiger at the time, allowing the Iranians to play around. So let's hope that this is the case, and we'll have to bite the bullet on all the other elements of this MOU, which will probably not include ballistic missiles, proxies, etc.
Despite these topics also being part of the negotiations in the 60 days, so to speak, for a permanent agreement. We have to wait and see. By the way, the ballistic missiles were also part of the talks, and the final document that ultimately ratified the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action of 2015, namely UN Security Council Resolution 2231, in which it did call on Iran not to proliferate or to develop ballistic missiles capable of carrying nuclear payloads. It was under Article 6, so it was obviously not binding. Now, Professor Berman, you have 30 seconds to have a closing analysis.
President Trump was under pressure with regard to the economy, domestically and internationally. He has elections coming up, so he wanted to move this ahead somewhat, but moving it to the MOU is not the end of the story.
Sure.
Well, when the figure 60 days was mentioned, it reminded me of two instances. First, last year, ahead of the June 2025 operation, the Iranians were supposed to respond by day 60. On day 61, Trump authorized the Israeli strike which he joined. Right. And the cutoff date in the War Powers Act is also 60. But as Professor Berman and Relik Shafir mentioned, because the midterm elections are coming up, in late August, we will see an extension. Maybe by late November, Trump will reconsider.
Well, time will tell. We'll have to see whether or not Trump would be willing to have the Iranians essentially maintain some sort of leverage over him during the midterm election, which is another question. But nonetheless, Professor Berman and General Shafir, thank you very much for all of your insights today. And I'd like to also thank Mr. Amir Oren and to thank you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.